Hello, I'm Earl Weinberg, and this is Book Circle Presents The Cavalry Cycle. This time we will continue our reading of The Lion Host. Enough of being the skittish horse. I don't know if you'll think it bad or not, Fletcher said. He faced them directly and spoke quietly. But I've never given anyone bigger news. He stood to attention and locked eyes with each of them in turn. You are no longer mortals. You are fays. They stared back, mouths open. Then, wait, why? Gus demanded. You said we didn't look like anything you knew of. I'm not going by how you look. I'm going by what's happened to you. What do you mean? The hive mind, Doug said. Fletcher nodded. We call it a troop. Fays can turn mortals into fays, but they do it by joining the mortals to a troop. Sometimes they simply have you live with the troop for a year or so, and it just happens. But you took an oath of service to her, accepted her hospitality, ate and drank and danced with her and her family. That gave her the opening to form a troop with you. Then she would have left the troop while you slept. Then she had her shapecaster transform you, but you were already fays. But what does that mean? Asked Doug. What is a fay? We're out of the troop now, right? Gus interrupted. I mean, the hive mind's over. Doug, can we change back? If we're fays and not mortals, does that mean, Gus, we're not stuck, are we? Can we go home? The troop ended when she died, as far as I can see, said Fletcher. You can go home. But looking like this? Gus stared down at his armored skin. And those other people in the stories, the ones who vaporized or had to go back, the ones who vanished were recruited as ghosts. They weren't fully embodied yet and just lost it in the shock. Probably didn't realize they were dead until then. The ones who went back had nowhere else to go. Centuries had passed. You've just missed 5 years. But what is a Fae? Doug demanded. A Fae is an immortal shapeshifter, Fletcher answered. There was another pause. No, wait, Gus objected. The boss, de Garadel, died. I went to her funeral. I saw the body. She will recover. It may take years or centuries, depending on her individual degree and kind of magical power, but someday she'll come walking out of that burial mound. They did bury her in a mound, didn't they? They nodded, and Fletcher nodded back. If they had cremated her and scattered her ashes, it would have taken much longer, but she would still come back. This way, at least, they know where she will appear and will be ready to meet her with the demand that she take a permanent oath of peace, if they have any sense. So, Doug said softly, seriously immortal. His gaze had gone somewhere deep inside. Fletcher smiled grimly. Seriously. Now it was Gus's turn to look thoughtful. When our guys died, JJ and Sandy and Gopal, and before them Raj and Terry, they buried them in mounds too. Did they know? Are our guys going to... Would we? He stopped and his gaze went inward too. Fletcher stared silently at the floor. He had seen people die. He had guided scores of men through transformations like his own. He had met ex-mortals, but he had never before told anyone they were immortal. They had asked him for guidance, but what could he possibly give here so far outside his own experience? Abruptly, Doug pushed the table aside, scrambled out of bed, and strode to the window. He gazed down over the town, one hand on the window frame, breathing hard. Gus did not seem to notice. His gaze still inward, he said to Fletcher, "You said we could go home. How?" The gears turned again in Fletcher's mind. He could advise. I will ask the captain of the Bethos to give you passage if you want. At the very least, I will leave you a passage map, and you can make your own way. But the Dagarandor said luck wouldn't let us get home. Something about luck does hide magic and its results from the Mond Minor, the ordinary world. We call it the Sundering. But I don't think the Dagorandor knew much about it. He lives far away from the Mond Minor, after all, and doesn't seem to have much interest. Your war lady clearly knew a lot more. All you have to do is keep out of public view or go disguised. That same twist of luck will bless your efforts. Gus brought his gaze outward again and looked at Fletcher doubtfully. How could I disguise this? He spread his arms and twitched his tail. Doug turned at the window, now listening. Glamour, said Fletcher promptly. You've heard of it? Gus nodded. When I go abroad, I wear some enchanted thing, a shirt or blanket, that makes me look like a horse or a mounted man. The Dagorandar wouldn't think of such things because his kinds can see right through them, but they work a treat on mortals. We sell such things at home. But that's just tricks with light, said Gus. An optical illusion can't really hide how big I am, or the tail and all, not close up. He stood and spread his arms again. Fletcher nodded. You could walk the streets, but you couldn't hide that from your family and friends. You would have to tell them at least some of the truth. Some? Fletcher considered briefly. I was captured by an evil warlord who experimented on me. That sounds really lame. Not if you're standing there 7 feet tall. Or take off the glamour and tell them the whole story. In either case, warn them of the bad luck if they try to make it public. Anyway, glamour is just the simplest, quickest fix, Fletcher went on. Shape-shifting, said Doug, but he sounded preoccupied. You're saying we can become shapeshifters. You already are, said Fletcher, regrowing arms and tails. It's built in. You just need to learn to control it. From what I've heard, it should be relatively easy to return to your original forms. Good, said Gus, but his gaze had returned inward and he sounded preoccupied too. There was silence for some seconds. Then Doug came and stood behind Gus, put hand on shoulder, and said, We have a lot to do. His voice was hushed. We do? Gus sounded distant. We need to tell the rest of the guys back in Huspahan. We need to get word to Venkat and Hank back in Bariad Torgon. We need to do something about our dead, our buried. We need to pick up some of these glamours and get home as quick as we can. Gus nodded. And then? He asked after a short silence. Doug stood silent too. Then, I don't know. The silence returned. Fletcher let them have it. Living alongside Faze, he had wondered often enough how he would face immortality. The wondering had come out many different ways. No telling which perspective on Everafter they were gazing down. Finally, it'll never get any better, Gus said. No, man, Doug denied, but he sounded unsure. We can go back. We can learn to change back. In fact, yeah, I know, but he broke off, then resumed. There was this story in my head. It was always there, I guess. I never thought about it until she took us. Then I did. It was pretty simple. I'd grow up and knock around the world and have adventures and get and be and get tough and smart, good enough so that I'd find a girl and we'd get married and have kids and I'd be good enough to take care of them until it was their turn. And then the girl, whoever she was, the girl and I would just go on together and look back on a job well done. But there's so many places that story can get torn up. And I knew it had. We all knew. It got torn up when she took us. Lots of us in the hive mind, you could feel it. Lots of us were mourning, supplied Doug. Gus nodded. Mourning for our stories. I thought I was over it. I mean, after she died, or whatever, we were all lost and confused and we still missed our old lives, but I didn't think it would hurt so much to hear again that my story was gone forever. I guess I hadn't really given up on it. When I saw your ship down in the harbor, I guess I started hoping again without realizing it. And now I've got to stop hoping again. And it hurts. I think it hurts worse. I thought we'd never find out where we really are or what we really are. I thought I'd just go on being crazy, and eventually we'd die without understanding what had happened to us. And that would be the worst. But at least I just now realized I was kind of counting on dying to end it, to be a way out. We could escape to heaven eventually. I didn't want to die, but I didn't want to go on in the craziness forever. Not forever. And now we do understand what happened, but it's not a way out. There's no way out. We can't leave. His voice began to sound tight and choked. Yeah, we can. We can go home. We can change back. No, no, we can go back where we came from and we can go back to looking like we did. But the craziness will follow us. We're part of it forever. Forever. But man, Doug protested, we're immortal. We're phased. Think of the possibilities. Are you happy with this? Gus asked, looking up. He met Doug's eyes, not resentfully, but with desperation in his gaze, a kind of hope. Doug looked back, confused, upset. Oh, no, 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 thought Fletcher. Don't ask your friend to be happy for you. That's no fair burden to put on him. I don't know, said Doug. It's a lot to take in. I think it's more to take in than waking up all scaly and taily. But you don't have to assume it'll be bad. But it can't be normal, and it can't end. Fletcher thought he heard a dam cracking. You and me, we were going to see the world. We've seen, what, 6 or 7 now? We wanted to see wonders. We did, and they were terrible. We wanted, oh God, Doug, all those nights under those sideways stars, all those days under that tiny sun, we wanted out. Each of us could feel all the others wanting out. And now we're just wandering around in weirdness, and we'll always be part of the weirdness, never get out, no matter where we go or what shapes we take. We can't go home. Sure, we can. If we go back to Chicago, we either hide what happened, what we turned into, and lie, or we don't and bring down all this weirdness on our families. Great choice. Damn her, damn her. Only that won't ever happen, will it? She'll just walk out of her grave someday and go on her merry way. She'll never go to hell, and we can never go to heaven. He waved at Fletcher's map. The circles of the world. We're bound forever to the circles of the world, like the Eldar, forever. He hung his head and wept. It was silent weeping, the kind made when no help can come. Doug's hand still rested on Gus's shoulder. He turned the grip into a one-armed hug, but hung his own head and stayed silent. Fletcher racked his brain for what to say. He had seen people weeping because the phase would not take them, left them to wither in their mortality. It was a commoner response. He thought Gus's reaction the wiser, but it was less than no help to tell Gus that. Do you know gospel music? Doug asked, out of nowhere, as far as Fletcher was concerned. His voice was flatly calm. I think I've heard of it, that's all. Created by the slaves in America and their children. It looks forward to heaven a lot. Fletcher saw Gus's closer ear twitch, listening. I understand it so much better now. Gus and I, we were both looking for something more, something beyond. Oh man, did we get smacked down for that. While we were enslaved in the troop, we by and large gave up thinking we could get home. All of us, hive mind. There was a sliver of desperate hope in some of us, like Gus, but we talked and thought a lot about escape, of course. But you had that chain on our minds. The only escape seemed to be death. So we thought about heaven a lot, or our next life, or nirvana, out, better, beyond. The differences didn't seem very important. Then we were freed, but only from her. Gus and I won't speak for the others, here we had all the something beyond anyone could want. And yeah, it would be nice to go home, but when you've given up on that, you start to see that this world, any of these worlds, aren't enough. They aren't the beyond you want, not really. Suppose we did live for decades of glorious adventure, lots of fun, but it adds up to what? Sir, Gus talked about heaven a lot lately. I listen, Fletcher thought. You were just two young men from Chicago wanting to knock around the world, never knowing you had a hunger for transcendence until you started starving for it. Doug met Fletcher's eyes. Is that what you're really telling us, Captain? That we're stuck here while glaciers roll and the moon falls and the stars die and the sky shreds and we're still stuck here? That we'll never reach a worthwhile beyond? Fletcher had had time to rally. No, no, I'm not. Lads, listen. I'm sure that neither death, nor life, nor angels, nor any other creature can separate us from the love of God in Christ. Paul, Romans. If life and death and angels can't do it, a jumped up elf certainly can't. Lads, listen. On the ship or on foot, every Sunday, our expedition stops for Mass, if at all practical. And I stand there making the responses in my pagan form. And you know who's perched on my back or my shoulders, like as not, to get a better view? Common fays. We've a dozen or so on this expedition, and they all took baptism as well as the mark, some of them back in St. Alice's day. Sorry, back in the 12th century. And while nations rose and fell, and the church herself reeled and splintered, they've been patiently waiting for kingdom come. Now, they have a natural advantage. Born phase, natural phase, aren't bothered by the idea of infinite time. They're made for ever after. They don't get dizzy looking ahead or behind. Just each day as it comes and plan as you need to. But you, us, life everlasting, yes, but even that isn't enough, and we know it. That's why you're terrified by the idea of ever after. We need more, and you'll get it. You'll get it. We all are waiting for kingdom come under one name or another, fey and mortal alike, waiting for it alive or dead. We were already immortal souls, you know. I will outlast Sagittarius just as you will outlast Leo. We will all remember the galaxies as an old tale. Now, in the meantime, and I grant there may be a lot of meantime, each day as it comes and plan as you need to is a pretty good strategy. Doug's got a good plan already laid out, I think. That will keep you busy for a while, give you time to think. But in general, he folded his arms and deployed the patient, probing gaze he had used on so many students. What do you think is the best thing you can do while you wait for kingdom come? Gus blinked the human tears out of his feline eyes and essayed a smile. Be good fairies? Doug burst into laughter and clapped his friend on the back. Fletcher relaxed, though he did not quite see the joke. We'll buy up teeth, Doug shouted. We'll be godfathers. We'll hunt monsters out from under beds, said Gus. Fletcher smiled. And my offer still stands, he continued. I will ask the captain of the Bethos if she can give you passage back to Grand Normandy, including your battle brothers in Huspahan. 20 is a lot to take on, but Captain Coudray isn't immune to compassion, and there's a definite glory in befriending a band of 20 elven knights. Elven Knight, exclaimed Gus. That's a role I can get behind. Beats orcs, seconded Doug. The three of them made plans, not forever after, but for the next few days. How long it would take to get to Huspahan and back, how much time it would take the rest of the Rauerhof to wind up their affairs, if they chose to come. What had been their route from Bariad Torgon to Varsus? They refined what to say to their families back in Chicago, something along the lines of, we were captured by an evil warlord who experimented on us, then we escaped and got mixed up in undercover work, so I can't tell you much more about it. By the end, they arranged for Gus and Doug to come down to the docks tomorrow, there to meet Fletcher and Captain Coudray, to hear her judgment and to debrief to her, her navigator, and other expeditionary scholars. Fletcher also wanted them to meet other folk who could best address their situation, the Fae of the Bethos, who could start teaching them shapeshifting or point them to those who could, and his own cavalrymen and the Mer crew who had been through transformation. Mer crew? You'll see. The two young men laughed a lot, even at tiny jokes or at nothing. Fletcher laughed with them and recognized their merriment as relief. Years of confusion were over. There was a prospect of home. There had been bad news, but it had been faced and was mixed with good. As Fletcher left, he heard Doug say, "Next time we get tangled up in my mythology and get turned into magic foxes," and Gus's returning laughter. Gus watched out the window, following Fletcher's tall form down the hill. Elven knights! Holy crow, I am an elven knight, he said to himself for the first time, and remembered the moment ever after. The end. I have one more story concerning Fletcher and his trainees and their expedition. This is Booster Shot. Danny trotted out of the barracks and pushed his gait up to a canter. He felt several kinds of happy at once. Earlier this morning, with the rest of the expedition, he had marched out of the passage in Upham Wood back into the cavalry base. There he had unpacked Nuck, Fru, Verity, and Bisu, the 4 horses in his charge, watered them, rubbed them down, turned them loose in the corral. They had gone with grateful sighs, Nuck and Bisu pausing to nuzzle him in the chest. He had turned to stow the gear they and he had been carrying, and was pleased to find that Eowick, or more likely one of the under-brownies, had whisked it all away, a treat you couldn't count on. Nice to know someone or something was glad to see him back. He said thank you to the air, adding, "It's good to be home." And it did feel like home, just as much as his parents' farm. Then to barracks and his first shower in months. Towel dry, then straight out the door, into the sun and into town. Still naked, but this made no difference on a hot day when you were a horse from the waist down. He wouldn't be the only naked pony boy at the pub, or the first to get there. He would, however, smell better than them, thanks to the shower. Several kinds of happy at once. He was happy to be home, happy to be clean and cool, happy to have leave time ahead. More importantly, he was happy to have completed his first expedition. At long last, he was past being a trainee. He was, without argument, a fully qualified member of the Grand Norman Dedicated Cavalry, the King's man horse, ready to charge off into the altar zones on the King's errands. He was 17 and bursting with the desire to be grown up. He was beginning to believe he was. He wondered if he liked beer yet. He hadn't last time he had tried, but that had been months ago. He'd try it, and if not, pass the mug into the first willing hand and order a cola. Then start looking for his family. He came cantering into the car park and checked. There was Captain Fletcher. But Danny had last seen Captain Fletcher 2 or 3 hours ago, trotting off to his own destination, Danny knew not where, with a cheery, "See you later, lads," and a wave. He, like Danny, had been clad in nothing but harness and sweat, his hair gathered back in a ponytail, as Danny's was, though Fletcher's was white, not ruddy brown, his beard clipped with scissors a week ago in camp and looking it, his dun equine body dark with perspiration. Now Fletcher stood before him in a patch of shade at the edge of the car park, neatly clad in a sports shirt and slacks, fanning himself with a floppy hat that was not a cavalry Stetson. The white hair was neatly clipped and the snowy bush of beard reduced to a goatee and mustache. But the main thing, which blinded Danny to all these details, was that Fletcher stood there on 2 legs, a man simple under 6 feet high. "Hello, my boy," said Fletcher, grinning at Danny's expression. "Spell wore off after all this time. Don't worry, I'm just on my way back to Blackwood for a booster shot." Danny had embraced his transformation enthusiastically. He had laughed as he first tried to rise on 4 legs. He had spent this year running ever deeper into the life he had chosen. He'd once had a nightmare in which the transformation had worn off, leaving him tiny and tippy, dodging about the barracks under the hooves of his mates. And here, Danny was young, but not stupid. Several details came fighting through the waves of panicky horror that tried to choke both sets of lungs. Never mind transformation, the barbering was mighty quick work, and "my boy" rather than "lad," and "Blackwood" rather than "Black Holt." And were the voice and face quite— "Don't tease the lad, Tom," said a blessedly familiar voice, and Captain Fletcher, on his own proper set of horse legs, came clopping into the car park. He was damply clean like Danny and wore a light sports shirt like the other, merely human Fletcher. Danny had seen his captain naked, harnessed, soaked, dusty, in all kinds of uniform, but never before, he reflected, in civilian clothes. However, his hair was still in a ponytail and his beard was freshly laundered, but no shorter. Tom, this is Cavalryman Daniel Bryce of the class of 17 and their best archer, one of the best I've seen. Danny felt the blood rush back into his face and mount into a pleased blush. He grinned and saluted the man. Danny, this is my brother, Tom Fletcher, who teases. Pleased to meet you, sir, said Danny. Pleased to meet you, Mr. Bryce, said the other Fletcher, reaching up to shake hands. My word, you did turn pale. I'm sorry. I saw your confusion and couldn't resist playing along a bit. We're not twins, Fletcher added, just a strong family resemblance. Yes, said Tom Fletcher, I'm the older. You can tell by the more responsible behavior. His brother snorted. The end. And next week, we will look at the class of 16. Danny was up the class of 17, but there was a class before him. Next week, we hear about them. Thank you.